stimulus should move forward? There's been some Republicans who suggest that
I don't know. It depends. It's certainly not the package that I saw today. Basically, if you look at that package, what they want more than anything else is it's a voting package. They want to be able to make sure that Republicans can't win an election by putting in all sorts of mailing ballots. Now, I don't know if you do because the press doesn't report this too much, but we had two very big victories last night. We won very big. Tom Tiffany won very big in the great state of Wisconsin. You saw that. That was last night it came in. That was a big one. You saw that, Doug? And won by a very, very substantial margin. And in California, of all places, we had a fantastic race, and this was all mail-in ballots. This was all mailed ballots. And when they saw, because it was mailed, they saw they were losing 3 days ago, and they ended up putting polling booths into basically Democrat areas. But despite that, it's looking like Mike Garcia, I don't know if they've called the race yet, but he was substantially ahead. That's the problem with mail-in ballots. Are they going to dump a whole pile of ballots on your desk just before the election? So the problem with the mail-in ballots, it's subject to tremendous corruption, cheating. And so I'm against it. And if you look at the bill that Nancy Pelosi is putting in, has a lot to do with elections, and then we're not going to lose elections because of that.
Okay, so this is Trump claiming that the next stimulus bill shouldn't pass because Democrats only want to ensure that no Republicans can win by allowing mail-in voting, only to then immediately congratulate Republican Mike Garcia for winning a mail-in election in California's 25th district. And you thought logic was a prerequisite for the presidency. Now, I know that Trump thrives in disinformation, so here are the facts about California's 25th district and the election that just happened there. Republican Mike Garcia does seem to have defeated Christy Smith for a special election to fill that seat between now and November 3rd, when the two will face back off again and turnout will be significantly higher. Now, first, the election was not all vote by mail. Prior to adding an in-person voting location in Lancaster, which is a city in the northern suburbs of LA, there were 12 other in-person polling locations in the district. Lancaster is also represented by 2 Republicans in the state legislature, as well as a Republican mayor who is a vocal supporter of Trump. But because this polling location would serve a city that's predominantly black, well then suddenly Trump is crying foul. Because it's not that he wants to suppress the vote for all voters, but he definitely wants to suppress the vote for black ones who overwhelmingly vote Democratic. Now, as for the bill that Trump is complaining about here, it's called the HEROES Act, and it was presented by House Democrats as the next stimulus package. It includes money for states and local governments, which is especially important to keep funding public workers like police, first responders, and teachers. It includes another round of $1,200 stimulus checks for Americans. There would be more funding for testing and coronavirus tracing. It would extend expanded unemployment insurance by $600 per week until the end of July, and make more people, including freelancers and the self-employed, eligible to receive it. There would be more money for small businesses, support for SNAP benefits, COBRA subsidies, but among the most important elements is that it also includes money for elections and vote by mail, as well as funding for the US Postal Service. Now, while Trump and Republicans launched bad faith attacks about the appropriateness of allocating funding for elections in a pandemic relief bill, remember that making sure we don't have to choose between our health and our right to vote is absolutely relevant to the relief bill. Consider the fact that in Wisconsin, when the Republican-led state Supreme Court mandated in-person voting despite the outbreak, more than 50 people who voted in person or worked the polls tested positive for coronavirus. And so despite Republicans' desperation to discourage people from voting in densely populated areas, which just so happen to vote Democratic, we clearly need to prioritize safe alternatives so that we don't have to die to have a voice in our democracy. And the Postal Service is a crucial element of that. Republicans are hell-bent on letting the USPS collapse as a way to ensure that vote by mail is impossible. And so they'll sabotage it, or try and privatize it, or do whatever they can to ensure that voting won't be easy and accessible for the American people. So if expanding vote by mail and absentee voting, which by the way, Donald Trump himself takes advantage of, is gonna work, then funding the Postal Service is an absolute must. Consider too that the bill doesn't even mandate vote by mail. Instead, the $3.6 billion in requested funding would help states expand vote by mail or no excuse absentee voting, or increase funding for personal protective equipment for poll workers in states that do keep in-person voting. The approaches differ by state, But the through line here is that steps need to be taken now to ensure that voting is both accessible and safe for everyone. By the way, Trump has made fear-mongering about voter fraud a cornerstone of his presidency. That's why he created a voter fraud commission to try and justify his claim that there were 3 to 5 million undocumented immigrants voting in the 2016 election, which the commission couldn't find before being forced to disband. That's why he claimed that he only lost New Hampshire because out-of-staters drove in and cast ballots there. That's why he said Republicans lost the 2018 midterms by claiming that after voting, some people would, quote, go to their car, put on a different hat, put on a different shirt, come back in and vote again. There's no truth to any of it. But he says it to manipulate people on the right into thinking that it exists by virtue of repeating it so often. But manipulation is all that it is. Take California, the biggest state in the nation under full Democratic control, vote by mail, the works. In 2016, investigators found 6 cases of possible fraud out of 23.1 million votes cast that were even worth sending to local district attorneys. 6 out of 23.1 million. Although I should mention that in recent memory, there has been one notable instance of election fraud. It was perpetuated by a Republican operative to try and steal the election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. Funny how Republicans are always suggesting that the Democrats are busy cheating in elections, and yet the only actual instance of fraud here was perpetuated by the right. So Trump and Republicans will continue to throw temper tantrums at the notion that Americans should actually have a voice in our own democracy. But that's only because they know that they have no mandate to enact their agenda. They are propped up by a minority of Americans who don't even come close to speaking for the greater population of this country. But now that Americans are finally paying attention, Republicans know that if everyone's able to cast ballots, they won't have jobs after November 3rd.